This next episode is going to be with Dr. Gordon Burghardt. Gordon was is professor emeritus at the University of Tennessee. He just recently retired, and he spent much of his early part of his career studying snake behavior, then moved on to black bear behavior, and then in the latter part of his career, he began to study animal play. And he provided many new perspectives and created multiple groundbreaking theories as far as the study of animal play goes. So at one point, Gordon was the president of the Animal Behavior Society and chief editor of Division 6 of the American Psychological Society. He's also author of The Genesis of Animal Play, Testing the Limits, published in the MIT Press 2005. But along with all these accomplishments, Gordon has been one of my greatest mentors, and he really pushed me out of my comfort zone to become a better student and a better man. I took his class, The Psychology of Play, at UT when I was a junior, and so it was a graduate level course, and with all the other academic responsibilities I was juggling at the time, I wasn't putting in the right amount of work in the early part of the course. And so about halfway in, I really sort of devoted myself to the studies he was having us read, and I really fell in love with a lot of what I was reading, and I fell in love with Gordon's passion for his work and for his studies. And so, with that being said, like many of the great mentors in my life so far, they have sort of rubbed me the wrong way at certain points. My dad was very hard on me growing up, but I'm eternally grateful for him, like I said, pushing me out of my comfort zone. And so Gordon pushed me to become a better man, and I am forever grateful for him for it. With that being said, this is my episode with Dr. Gordon Burghardt. Hope you guys enjoy. Thanks. So I'm here with, I would say, my greatest academic influence and my favorite professor, and I'll go ahead and get into something real quick about mentors. A lot of the greatest mentors in my life pushed me a little bit harder than I was willing to go when I first met them. I had a coach in football growing up who would yell and scream and get on to you, but it was only because he knew that I had something better in me, that I had the opportunity to improve, and that being comfortable isn't necessarily the best thing. And so I got into your class, the psychology of play, and I was kind of out of my comfort zone, and it was harder than any class I'd ever taken because I'd never had to read that much every week. But I finally got about halfway through the semester, and I was like, I really got to do this. I really got to kind of buckle down and really get into what he's telling me to read. And so I remember reading the paper about cooperation, and it was mind-blowing. It was a really cool paper kind of illustrating the fact of when people in groups decide to cooperate, they're able to simply outcompete, selfish individuals. And it kind of goes to show that the evolutionary underpinnings of why humans have come to cooperate, and it's simply because, as they said it in the paper, 2 men are able to kill a stag, and then 1 man would be, lucky to kill a hare. So I just wanted to say thank you again for pushing me out of my comfort zone and kind of helping me become a man. And so, we'll go ahead and kind of get into your career. If you could kind of explain who you are, what you've done a little bit, very briefly.
Yeah, I've just went emeritus as retired officially from the University of Tennessee after being a professor here for over 54 years. Mm-hmm. I grew up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and then went to the University of Chicago for undergraduate work, and as a chemistry major, and that was my love. I love chemistry. Mm-hmm. But I also loved animals, and particularly reptiles, and especially snakes. But I had as a kid turtles and lizards and snakes. And in high school, we took care of a boa constrictor and a little caiman. And but there really wasn't, as far as I knew, any career that you could actually study these animals and make a living. But at the University of Chicago, I heard that was a new program that was just being started called biopsychology, which was a joining of biology and psychology. And I finally got some information on that as a junior. And the head of that program, when he heard what I was interested in, and most of the people studying animals in psychology were studying rats and pigeons and maybe some monkeys, but not really, reptiles. But the head of that program said, after he heard me, he said, "You need to take Dr. Hess's course, Eckhart Hess's course on instinctive behavior," which I did, and that's the course that turned me around, and the professor that had the great influence on me. And what he was talking about animal behavior and studying it in natural situations, not just in laboratories, and focusing on what animals really did in their day-to-day life, not you bring them into the lab and teaching them how to peck or press a lever or something like this and ask questions that you really weren't interested in the animals as an animal, but just as a model to study something about humans. So you couldn't do certain things with humans, but you could, put the animal in the box and give it different stimuli and condition it by food or giving electric shocks and stuff that I thought was terrible. I wouldn't want to do that. But this professor...
Let me interrupt you real quick. I want to make sure the camera's rolling. I think it may be... Okay. We've got the... let me see. I've got the audio rolling, so I'll edit this out. But, okay. So we may have a minute or two without footage, but we've got the audio rolling, so that works.
Okay.
But yeah, go ahead. Continue.
So Dr. Hess, he was known for studying imprinting in birds, which was the process that when a baby duckling or chicken or duckling or goose gosling sees a maternal figure, like normally their mother, they then imprint on that and become attached to that mother figure. But he showed that you could get these animals to attach and treat as a parent the male rather than a female or a completely different species, and even humans. And so he had an experimental model for studying this behavior, which seemed really attractive and fascinating to me. But I was interested in reptiles, and that summer, after I took that class, I asked him if I could work in his laboratory and studying snakes. And he said, maybe not snakes, how about lizards? And so I spent the summer studying a project involving lizard perception of prey, mealworms and things like this. And it turned out that I got results, and eventually they were published. And eventually I was able to stay there for my graduate work and did have the opportunity to study snakes. He was reluctant at first to have me study snakes because his wife, one time another student, many years before, had some snakes in the lab and they got out. And she was deathly afraid, and she walked in and got completely freaked out. And he promised that he'd never have snakes in the lab again. And then I came along, and that's what I wanted to do. So one of his grad students, the name of Eric Klinghammer, who was studying birds, he was on my committee eventually, but he was living in Indiana, across the border into Indiana from Illinois, because this is University of Chicago, right near Chicago. And he found a snake, and he knew I was interested in snakes, and he found a pregnant a garter snake, and he said, "Hey, do you want it?" And his dog had found it, and so I said, "Sure, bring it in." But I couldn't keep it in the lab.
Mm-hmm.
And I was living as a grad student in a studio apartment, one room, with a bathroom, basically, where the bed was a Murphy bed that you had to pull down, and everything was, very compact. Probably the whole place was no bigger than this room.
There we go. Yeah, go ahead.
No bigger than this a room. So these animals, the mother gave birth to 20-some babies, almost 30 babies, and but I couldn't keep them in the lab. So I had to set up in this little apartment all these cages for every one of these babies, 20-some babies, and I did an experiment on how they responded to chemical cues of prey. And since I was I was interested in chemistry, this was a way I combined my interest in chemistry with that of the snakes, because snakes are really cued into chemical cues. When you see a snake tongue flicking, it's picking up chemical cues from the environment, from what it touches or from the air. And I was able to show that these baby snakes right at birth could recognize the type of prey they should eat, quotes they should be eating, that they were adapted to. And this experiment was so successful, and I found it really pretty exciting, that my professor did allow me to do further research in the lab on the basis that his wife would never have to go near that room, which was happy with me. She's a very nice lady, but I did not want to jeopardize things. So anyhow, I was able to carry out my research on the development of behavior and chemistry of perception in snakes, and that was my dissertation. And I started teaching at.
I'll start you real quick. So you said I guess you worked with snakes when you were in high school. Was there some formative experience that drew you towards snakes? Because I'll say with me, I had snakes in one of my classrooms growing up, and I was scared of them until I had a snake in my hands, and I was like, this thing is cool. There's no fear anymore, and I felt sort of in tune with it. It was really cool. So was there an experience?
I don't know. I think I always got interested in snakes, and I think I found them in our area where I lived. They're not there anymore, but you go down to the train tracks and the fields where there were boards and so on, almost like dump sites, and there are lots of garter snakes underneath them. And I found these pretty interesting, and I could bring them home. My grandfather, I know, helped me build a little, nice cage for them and so on. And so, even in grade school, I really got interested in snakes and other animals. We always lived in an apartment that we could never have a cat or a dog. So that's why I had a whole variety of different animals, including turtles and lizards and snakes. I had a pet raccoon one time. I had a pet skunk.
I was looking and doing research for this. I saw at one point, this is obviously later in your life, but you had a bear cub, right? That you lived with. Was it up in the cabin?
No, actually, that was at my house. That was after I came to Tennessee. So if you can jump ahead to after I finished my dissertation work at the University of Chicago, I started teaching there in biology and behavior. But an opportunity came that my major professor told me, hey, one of my buddies is the head of the Department of Psychology here at the University of Tennessee, and they're looking for somebody interested in perception, visual and sensory processes, and that's what I was working with the snakes. And are you interested? I'll put your name in. And so he did, and then I got a call, hey, send me your information and stuff like this, and I came here for a visit, and it was left a storm, a blizzard in Chicago, came down here. It was,
Mm-hmm.
bright and sunny like it is outside now. And I thought I could do this,
Mm-hmm. Was that
And
your
the
first time
university-
to
yeah.
East Tennessee?
Oh, no, as a kid, my mother and friends, we did a driving tour through the Smokies and up the Blue Ridge Mountains, so I had that little familiarity. But that was, when I was like 12 or something like that. So I came down here, and but I was interested in reptiles. The psychology department, there aren't that many people who study psychology of reptiles. Now there's more than there was when I started. But as soon as I came down here, within months, there was a problem with the bears in the Smoky Mountains. This was the time before there were bear-proof garbage cans, before they were keeping people from feeding bears on the roadside and so on. So they had bear jams, and some of the older people might
It's finicky.
remember when you couldn't get across the mountains from 441 across the Smokies because you would just be stopped cold because everybody was out. They saw a bear, they'd go out and start tossing it food and so on, and then rangers would have to come and try to just get the bear shot away and get people moving again. So the Park Service decided they were going to institute a 10-point plan to control the bear problem in the Smokies, and one of them was outfitting all the park rangers with baseball bats, so that whenever there was a bear jam, they could go up to the bear and they'd hit the bear on the head with a baseball bat as a way of reinstilling its instinctive fear of humans. And the bears are pretty smart. That's one thing I learned. And so I still remember being on one of the roadsides where there were park jam, and a ranger got out of the car. I mean, they had these big hats and everything on, and as soon as the bear saw the ranger from the it just took off, right? Because they learned to just get away because they knew that they weren't supposed to be there if there was a ranger around. But it didn't deter them from being there when they didn't see a ranger. Right?
I guess they are pretty smart.
They had this 10-point plan, and the last item was to foster research in the park on bears. Well, I didn't know anything about bears, but I did know about behavior, and I knew that hitting bears with a baseball bat was not necessarily the way you're going to reduce aggression or anything from the bears, because the bears would, with impunity, walk into a campground, for instance, and pick the people having picked together. They would go in and take the food and go off, and people would go to challenge them.
That reminds me of, I remember there was one time I was camping when I was young, and we had a bear come up in the middle of the night and shake our camper. I've had a few close encounters with bears when I've been camping, but it also reminds me the thing you said about the baseball bat. So my grandfather owned a cattle farm, and I remember one time, this was probably when I was 15 or 16, I remember somehow getting in the pen with the bull, and all I had was a walking stick, a big, long wooden walking stick. And so I imagine even a baseball bat hit to the head of a bear probably wouldn't do that much damage, because
they weren't going to necessarily injure the bear. They just wanted to give it enough of a punishment that it would stay away.
Yeah, I remember all I had was this walking stick, and so to keep a distance between me and this bull, I had to, with every last ounce of strength in my body, slam it in between the eyes. I was hitting this bull as hard as I could in between the eyes just to keep some distance, and it was almost cuddling with me. He didn't even understand that I was intending to protect myself. He was just kind of having a good time. So it's funny that you brought that up. Go ahead.
So anyhow, we were going to try to do something with bear research, and I was here at the University of Tennessee, close to the park, and so we invited the park superintendent and his right-hand man, the resource manager, to come to the university to discuss possible research collaboration between the park and the University of Tennessee. And so the superintendent of the park came, gave a talk to the psychology department and the zoology department, because I was sort of associated with both, about the problems in the park. And then we met with him, with the department heads, to discuss possible strategies, and they were really encouraging. It didn't have any money or any support, but they said, hey, we'd like you to do this. So we started doing some observations of actually being an ethologist. I wanted to look at what animals and people, of course being animals, do. And so we wanted to find out what kinds of interactions were taking place between people and bears. And so we started working on that. But we didn't get into it very far when all of a sudden I got a call that the park, a park ranger had come across some bear cubs that were 4 bear cubs that were under a log and so on, in a little den area, but the mom was nowhere to be seen. But he thought that, well, maybe she'll be coming back. Well, he came back a day or two later, and now 2 of the cubs were gone, and the other 2 weren't, weren't in really good shape. And he felt that maybe there were feral dogs or that had driven the mother off, and she wasn't going to come back, or something had happened to her. So he took the bear cubs, but they didn't know what to do with the bear cubs. So, hey, you're the guy who knows about behavior in the cubs. So I ended up having these bear cubs in my house for a number of months, rearing them, which was fantastic. They ran around the house. They built sort of a playpen for them that had a top. So unlike with babies, they couldn't get out because they can climb very, very well. And these are the most amazing animals that I've ever lived with. The kitten Kate, they were twin girls, and we had to give them bottles, like 20. We had to be available 24/7, giving them formulas, and I had to figure out how do you feed a bear and the kinds of things that they like, and did my research, and we were successful. And then I applied for some money from the Park Service, not from the National Institute of Mental Health. We got some money to build enclosures for the bears in the park, because of course we weren't going to keep them in the house forever. And so we built enclosures in the park, and a number of grad students then did their dissertation work on the behavior. We were the first ones to show that bears actually have really good color vision. They were thought that, like dogs, they were colorblind, and we looked at their play behavior. We looked at their foraging behavior, food preferences. We did a lot of different types of research on these bears, and eventually one of them ended up at the Maxwell Zoo for a while. And
I want to interrupt you too, because I was interviewing my third cousin Jerry, who said he knew you. I don't think you knew him. His name's Jerry Dinkins. He works in the McClung Museum. He's a malacologist. And so I told him that I was going to be interviewing you, and this reminds me of the zoo. He told me a story before we started filming about, there was one time, I think this is back in the 70s, where you were studying, I guess, the diet of some African tortoise. And so you had sent a couple students over there to, I guess, take the samples of its dung, and he said that they came back and were speeding down Cumberland, and that they were pulled over and searched, and when they found the tortoise dung, the officers thought it was marijuana. And so he told me, does this ring a bell? Or
yes, but I wasn't involved in that.
It wasn't you. Okay,
I
guess
think
it was
I
some
was
other
in
student.
I wasn't in the car, as far as I know.
You weren't in the car, but apparently you had to call down to the police station and get him out, right?
I think so. I think, yeah. This was so long ago.
Yeah.
I remember the details on that, but no, I did do quite a bit of work at the zoo over the years, and we worked on a variety of the turtles. Of students did as well as on some of the lizards and snakes over there.
Yeah, go ahead though.
So anyhow, we had the bear cubs, and then I got some funding from the National Institute of Mental Health, actually, to build these enclosures, and we kept the bears there for a while, as I said, and did our research with them. At about this time, while we had the bear cubs, a professor came into the wildlife department, forestry, wildlife and fisheries, Mike Pelton, and he had students then who studied the ecology of the bears and began radio tracking and doing a lot of research with the bears, which is now continuing. Mike Pelton is long retired, but there still is an active program of research on the bears in the park. And the bear population in the park has really recovered now. When we first started the research back in 1970 or so, the population was down in the park, and there was some concern about the viability of the bears in the southeast region. But now they're doing very, very, very well. And in fact, they often, almost every year, there's an incident about a bear coming into Knoxville, wandering out of the park into populated areas, and then people get a little concerned.
Yeah, I've heard typically with conservation efforts, I've heard the cuteness factor. Typically, the cuter the animal, the easier it is to galvanize support and funding for these conservation efforts. And it actually reminds me of something. So I'm reading the biography of Teddy Roosevelt right now, and I learned the whole story about where teddy bears come from, because apparently back he was obviously like an avid game hunter, and he would go out and hunt bears, and so he was in Pennsylvania doing like a national tour, and so the local Pennsylvanians were like, all right, we've got this great photo opportunity. We've got this bear. We're going to chain him up to a tree. Teddy's going to walk over here. We're going to take a big picture, and it's going to be like Teddy killed the bear. And so he gets to where the bear is, and he sees this emaciated bear tied up to this tree, and he breaks down in tears. And he's like, what are you people doing to this poor bear? And so he goes up to the bear and frees it and lets it go. And so that's kind of where the association between bears and Teddy came from. And so in the newspaper, they drew cartoons of bears that looked like Teddy. And so that's where that comes from. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, Smokey the Bear started with using the bear as a symbol for forests and preventing forest fires, which is now sort of controversial. If you prevent them all the time, you may have a problem like we had a few years ago here in the Smokies, which led to some serious tragedies. But anyhow, that's jumping from the snakes to the bears. But eventually, a number of students here got interested in studying other animals than the bears. So I had students work on iguanas in Panama. We did a lot of work down there, and a whole bunch of other species.
Yeah, I believe I told you I went on a vacation to Costa Rica, which is obviously close to Panama, when I was in elementary school, and I always found it really cool. It was in the middle of a city center. I don't know. It was a small town, but there was one tree with probably 100 iguanas in it. And they all, I guess they're probably a herd species, but and that it also brings up another interesting story that I already kind of told you about, but I'll rephrase it because I actually misspoke when I was telling you this. So we were next to the volcano Arenal in Costa Rica, and it was the coolest thing to me. I was probably 8 or 9 years old, but there was this one tree that was filled with probably 1,000 or so eyelash vipers. I said pit vipers before, but it was the eyelash vipers, and they were all colored like highlighters. It was neon yellow, neon orange, neon green, and
right. They're very colorful, particularly when they're young.
Yeah. They were all very small. Yeah. But yeah, so we'll go ahead and move on. So I know you spent a good, portion of the beginning of your career studying snakes and bears. And then at what point did you move to studying play behavior?
Well, I've been continuing to study snakes and reptiles to the current time. We're still publishing on their behavior. But what happened was a couple things. First of all, the bears really were so playful. And our first paper on bear behavior was a report on our experience raising these bear cubs, and I discussed their play behavior as something that was really pretty remarkable. And but I had never really seen play in reptiles or other animals, and it wasn't something that was a deep research interest at that time. But then an article came out written by a British scholar who studied primarily children, but he wrote a paper on play behavior, reviewing with some theoretical ideas on play. And it was published in Behavioral and Brain Sciences, which is one of these journals that publishes a target article, and then they invite people to write commentaries, and then the author of the target article responds. This is one of the first journals to really do this. Now it's a fairly common thing, and quite a few journals have that format. But he wrote this article on on play, primarily on primates, non-human primates, and made certain arguments, for instance, that animals that are socially complicated, have really highly organized, large social groups, are the ones where you're going to see more play and things like that. And I was asked to write a commentary on that, and so I wrote a commentary bringing down my ideas on bears, and bears are not considered a really highly social animal, except for the parent-offspring bond, the mother-offspring bond. They don't live in social groups or have hierarchies and things like this, but they're very smart, and they are super playful when they're young. And then I also did not see that that reptiles played at that point. And so, well, why? Well, first of all, the argument being that sociality may not be key to play behavior, because bears were not very social, but they were super playful. And also orangutans, which are a relatively solitary ape, also are very playful. So that seemed to throw some chinks into that argument about sociality being a key factor in social play development. And the other thing was that reptiles, I had not seen, even though I've been studying young reptiles, I hadn't seen anything that I would call play. And well, why? Well, one of the reasons is that reptiles are primarily born very precocial. There's not too much parental care in many species, so they have to solve all their problems right at birth or hatching by themselves. They have to find food, protect themselves from enemies, from predators, and from the elements, cold weather and things like that. And so maybe they just don't have the opportunity to, and their leisure to engage in playful behavior. And so I wrote a little commentary on that. And the author of Peter Smith, the author of the target article, responded and so on, and along with all the other commentaries. But then he wrote me saying he was going to put together a book on play behavior in animals and humans, and he was intrigued enough with my ideas that when I write, would I be interested in writing a chapter. So I wrote a chapter, which turned out to be the first chapter in a book called On the Origins of Play, in which all of a sudden now I had to get into the literature and actually take it seriously. And so I found out a lot about play, and also found out that a lot of people talked about play, but they didn't really know much about what they were really talking about, or about the animals. And then as I got into this more and more, I started coming up, well, how do we define play? How do we recognize it? People were just saying that, well, play is something that you find in intelligent animals, maybe mammals, maybe some birds, but really nobody else plays. Any reports of play in a fish, for instance, or a reptile was just incomplete instinctive behavior, or the person observing it was just so ignorant they didn't know that there were alternatives. This is before there were people documenting with video. So all you had was verbal reports most of the time, or just a simple photograph, but not movies, not video that would actually document the behavior. Well, I took a trip to the National Zoo I guess shortly thereafter, early 80s, and they had a turtle that was advertised as the first, as the best basketball player in the zoo. And there was this large soft-shelled turtle, Nile soft-shelled turtle, which was huge, and it was in a really barren concrete tank.
And I was listening to one of your lectures, and wasn't it exhibiting self-injurious behavior?
Right, yeah.
And then, go ahead.
And and it was scratching, biting, and doing things to its body. And the keeper, or the curator of the reptile house at the zoo, was trained in reptile behavior and ethology, and knew enough about them to actually ask for the first time, maybe it's bored. Maybe it's in such a simplified environment that it can't really do anything, and so it ended up, just like feather plucking and bird parrots and stuff like this. This is stereotypical behavior that is self-injurious, but it maybe because of the abnormal situation which the animal's being kept. And so he said, well, maybe the animal's bored, and he started providing it some objects, including, since it was an aquatic turtle, balls, like a basketball, and the animal started batting it around and so on. And I provided other kinds of objects in the tank for the turtle, and lo and behold, the self-injurious behavior declined dramatically. And
let me get into something, and I'm going to be guilty of having an anthropomorphic worldview, but I wanted to touch on something. So I guess underpinning play, I think about humans, and which humans are unable to play, and it's typically those who have to struggle, who may not have access to resources. Do you find that similar in the animal world?
Oh yes, I think that is part and parcel of the theory that I developed, because I call surplus resource theory, that you're going to find animals that playing, regardless of their taxonomic position, whether they're mammals or birds or a frog or a fish or an octopus, animals that have more behavioral resources. They can do more things with their body, and they have the nutritional and metabolic abilities and resources, and the time, protected time in a way, to engage in different behaviors is where you're going to see play, particularly play with objects and so on. So one of the things that I noticed in the first article, a review I did of play, is that we often find play in animals that are in captivity that are well kept. healthy and they're given adequate nutrition and so on. So you find in zoos animals playing more than that same species may in the wild. And, of course, they're more bored in captivity, but they also don't have to worry about predators, looking around for enemies, or for spending all the time finding food. So they have more leisure time, you might say. And combined with being bored, they may want to start just to, interact with things in ways that normally they might not do. So we have in play behavior, we have basically with animals 3 types of play. We have the playing with objects. We have the playing solitary locomotor type of play, jumping, climbing, diving, all kinds of running, chasing game, and then social play.
Let me touch on something because I want to add on one more thing with the anthropomorphism, and I'll move on because I know it's one of the cardinal sins. But so you talk about the turtle, the soft-shell turtle in the zoo. Do you maybe find that tracks onto humans? Maybe individuals that don't have access to like a playful outlet or anything that brings them joy. Is that maybe something that does contribute to self-injurious behavior in humans, or is that too much of a stretch? Or
well, I would say that.
I mean, there's other factors, obviously.
Right. I mean, in terms of self-injurious behavior, I don't know. There is, some work on that, like with the soft-shell turtle and animals that do things that are sort of not in their self-interest, you might say, or self-injurious. But I don't know if I want to
go that far.
Go too far. But the idea being that if you're in a situation where there's not much to do or you don't have many resources, you start using your imagination, you start playing with things that you might not otherwise play. Now, social play, of course, is the most studied type of play, and it's very common, wrestling and chasing games and so on. And there is evidence that if animals are kept solitary, they may start playing with an object almost socially, as if it was a partner. And that type of play, when the animal has an opportunity to play with another animal, they'll preferably play with the other animal than with the object. But the object then can become a social substitute. And in humans, we can see this with young kids and imaginary friends, or playing with your doll or a teddy bear as if it's a real animal. They talk to it, they may put it to sleep, right? I mean, you start treating the object that the child knows is not real, not alive, but nonetheless they imagine, they play with it as if it was
and so you touched on the 3 types of play: locomotor play, object play, and social play. And this touches on an example in my life and something I'll continue to bring up. But I go out with friends on the weekend every now and then. I'll have fun watching movies with friends. I do a lot of things socially. But the absolute favorite part of my week is my Monday, Wednesday, Friday basketball games. We play at noon on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and that's why I can never meet you then. But to me, basketball touches all 3 aspects of the types of play. So locomotor, I'm jumping around, I'm guarding people, I'm going for rebounds. Object play, we obviously play with a basketball and a hoop. And then social play, which I think is the most fun part about it, is because I'm out there jawing and having fun with friends. And it's interesting. It's, like I said, the absolute favorite part of my week. So go ahead.
Well, that's one of the things that people talk about, the 3 types of play, but they're not completely separate. And in fact, like even with dogs, for instance, might play with an object, tug of war, they chase,
Mhm.
right? So again, all three types of play can be blended, not just with humans in
Mhm.
your basketball game and other sports that involve objects, but in animals
Mhm.
behavior too. And there's neat studies in the wild, even with birds and with wild canids,
Mhm.
wild dogs, and so on in South America. So there's really nice work where they're very social and they play with objects and with each other in comparable ways.
Mhm.
So we do know that play now. Once we got a definition that I was able to work up, or a way of recognizing play in animals and contexts where you didn't think play was occurring because
Mhm.
people told you, well, fish can't play. Well, we now know that there's some pretty good examples of fish play, or turtles playing, octopus play. In fact, there's just within the last month or two, there were these reports of this remarkable play in bumblebees with objects. And this fellow in England, Lars Chitka, who's been studying bumblebees for years, he wrote a recent book called The Mind of the Bee, did some really elegant experiments documenting that these bees play, that the younger ones play more than the older ones, the same type of patterns that you see in play and mammals and birds, you find in these in these bumblebees. And he's got video that goes along with the reports, and they've been publicized, so you can get these on YouTube, I'm sure. But it's really pretty remarkable with these bees rolling these balls around and jumping on them. But these bumblebees are actually very smart. They can count. They can problem solve and do a variety of different things that people didn't think that animals other than monkeys or chimpanzees could do 40, 50 years ago. And now we're finding that if you look carefully and have open mind, you find that animals are really remarkably adept in doing lots of things, and their brains and their emotions are often very similar to our own. Not identical, but that they have the same kind of responses to events in our lives.
And it comes down to did you call it the excess resource theory?
Surplus
resource theory. With bees, they have spent probably millions of years. Over the course of evolution, they have found ways to accumulate mass amounts of resources. They have more honey than they know what to do with, considering we can all eat it. And so I guess with them producing all of this food and all of these resources, they do have the time to just sit back and learn how to play. And
And in these captive studies, these are studies with captive, really well-kept bees, but they don't have to really work that much probably for their resources. Again, they probably have a little more of those quotes, the luxury to engage in behavior, not having to worry about predators and.
But yeah, so I'll touch on your definition of play, and it touches on the 5 conditions for play. You say, play is a repeated behavior that is incompletely functional in the context or at the age in which it is performed, and is initiated voluntarily when the animal or person is in a relaxed or low-stressed setting. So
that's sort of a one-sentence kind of
combination of all the
combination. But what I came up with, I looked at all the definitions of play that people had out there, and some were restricted only to social play, or and so that's not a general definition of play writ large. So I wanted to find a set of criteria that would allow you to identify something as behavior as play, even if you didn't know about it, that it could be play. And So I took all these definitions and the context, the criteria that people have put together, and then I repackaged them into these five criteria, and said that all five had to be satisfied before you could be super confident that this was play. And as I went through the literature and looked at this, you found some examples that might fit some of those criteria, but not all of them, but that then led to thinking about, let's see if we can satisfy those other criteria. And so initially with invertebrates, for instance, and insects and so on, I would say that, well, they meet 3 or 4 of these, I can definitely say, but I'm a little unsure about all of them. That's what the chapter in my book on the invertebrates I call play at the margins. And now those margins have been narrowed considerably because we have such good research like the one on the bumblebees that has come out. And another woman in Italy did some, with her students, did some nice work on wasps, social play in wasps. Whereas the bumblebee was object play. So,
so I'll go ahead and touch on the criteria of play, and I've kind of simplified these for conversation's sake. But the first criteria of play is that it does not contribute to current survival. The second criteria is it is done for its own sake. The third criteria it is that it's not serious. The fourth being behavior is repeatedly performed, and then the last is that play is initiated when the animal/human is free from stress and in a safe or relaxed state.
Right. So a certain amount of stress can, in fact, like you're in a conflict, like you really got a job, something paper you have to write or something like this. So you then may actually on your computer take a break and play. Play a game or something like that. So it's not as if there's no stress, but it's a mild stress. But if you're really starving or you're really ill or in pain, you're not going to necessarily start playing. So, but a low level of stress and boredom can be a facilitatory a factor here. Repeated is an important one that normally might not think about, but an animal can go up to an object and hit it. All it's doing is just, what is this? Is it something that I should be afraid of? Is it something I could eat? That's just exploratory behavior. But if it goes to that object and starts doing things with it, once it knows that it's not something that's going to eat or is a danger to it, then when the animal starts interacting with that object and it does it repeatedly, then we can more confidently say that that's acting playfully with that object. And similarly with locomotion, if animal can jump, but you see an animal diving and dancing and running around and doing things. It's not just escaping from a predator. It's doing it for its own sake in a way. So that's and when you say it's done for its own sake, or it's fun, or it's rewarding, or it's spontaneous, those are all getting at the same idea that it's not. It's a more voluntary behavior. So if you're forced to go out and play, that's not really play. If you're at the level of it's something that you're doing because you want to do it, because the animal is finding it or the kid is finding it, rewarding at that time to do.
But I'll touch on the fifth criteria here, and I'll touch back to my basketball example. Play is initiated when the human is free from stress and in a safe, relaxed state. And that reminds me, because in basketball, once every week or two, something a little bit too chippy happens, or somebody gets shoved and it turns into a spat, and regardless of what's happening, the game stops. It's interesting how that happens. you have to be free from stress and kind of in a free-flowing environment for play to take place.
Just what happened with the football game, with that injury, that tragic injury, and they, canceled the game, and it was really traumatic because that no longer was fun. It's no longer
a stress-free setting.
Right, and there's all the other players themselves would, I think, be emotionally affected. It wasn't just the fact you could take that player off this and then forget everything and we just go back to normal. No, it's it cast a serious pall over the whole endeavor.
And so I don't quite understand the umbrella this falls under, but it's in my notes, and it goes back to basketball. Self-handicapping, which there's a few other terms that go in this list, and I can't quite remember. Okay. But
within social play, the 5 criteria cover all different types of play. In social play, you have some other things that are going on frequently, and one of them is the fact you play signals that you communicate to the other person that this is play. And of course, in basketball and things, you have a lot of signals that are going on among the teammates and with your opponent. But then there's the self-handicapping, which, take golf. Players have their handicap, right? Because they're not all equal. And so in animals, we know that, or you're playing as an adult with a young child, you don't play at your full
capability,
full ability, so that to keep the game going, you hold back.
And I've got a great example of this in my basketball games, my Monday, Wednesday, Friday games. We have a rule that if one team wins 3 games in a row, then that team has to get off the court regardless, because we like to keep things going. Because if one team is just running through everybody, then nobody has any fun and people leave. And so we have that rule in place to keep the game going.
Yeah, so that I think is a really good example of this phenomenon. Like when you're playing with a young kid, if they always lose, they'll whine. You always win, and then they don't want to play anymore because it's not fun because they're always losing. And so we know that in animals, there's this turn taking and handicapping that takes place with the older animal, the more experienced animal, the larger animal might deliberately hold back in order to keep the interaction going, which is one way that you can distinguish that play from like a real fight, for instance, or a competition for a resource in which you don't want the other animal to keep competing. You just want them to leave, so you do everything you can to dominate the situation, but you can't in a social game.
I'll go ahead and semi-switch gears here. I'll go ahead and touch on the advantages first, but what do you think, or what have you found to be the evolutionary benefits of play?
Well, that's a really interesting question, because people have been, quote, searching for the function of play or animals play. In fact, that first paper I wrote on the origins of play, I began with the idea that they're searching for the rainbow, the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, like the function of play. And I said that was not the way to go around it. First of all, we had to find out what play was and what the mechanisms underlying it were and so on before we could even get at the question of its function. But more importantly, now we know that there isn't one function of play, that play has many functions, and even the same type of play in different species may have different roles, which complicates the story quite a bit. but as I think makes it more interesting in a way also. So rather than looking for the functional play, we're now thinking that there are what you might say mini theories of play, and that play may have different roles. So we know that play may have some role in stress reduction. Okay. Work done here in Matt Cooper's lab on hamsters and complementing behavior done with rats shows we showed that play in these young hamsters, if they don't have the opportunity to play, so you have to come up with the experiment, how do you deprive an animal of play without depriving it of other things that are important? Like you can't keep an animal in social isolation. Well, it's not going to play socially, but on the other hand, it's not going to do a lot of other things that it needs to. So in this case, with hamsters and rats too, the babies, the youngsters, don't play with the mother. The mother doesn't play with them. She does all kinds of other things socially with her offspring, but doesn't do the rough and tumble play that the young pups would do with each other. And so you could have pups raised with each other or with their mom, and so one plays and the other doesn't, but they have a lot of the same other social experiences. And what we showed was that not only do their brains develop differently, but that those animals that have the play experience, if they get serious stress or conflict with other animals later in life, they are more buffered, more resilient to deal with those situations than if they haven't had that play experience. And there are comparable kinds of things. If young kids, for instance, get out there and climb trees and do kinds of things that have a little risk to them, but that might make them more resilient to deal with physical events, falling, things like this. If they, as compared to if they have not had those experiences, if parents are so protective that they don't allow their children to experience a variety of things that may have some risks of injury, but on the other hand, they're getting experiences, they're building up strength, they're getting a sense of balance and stuff like this. That could be another function of play. There's the idea that social play may also help you learn how to deal with others. And we know that in some animal play, like with rats and so on, animals that are playing don't necessarily learn how to be better fighters. That's not it. They're learning how to read the signals appropriately from conspecifics, from other animals of their kind. So as adults, they know when to back off and when to, play-deprived animals don't seem to be able to know when the other animal is saying, no, don't approach me, don't do this, or you're going to get bitten or attacked. And if they haven't had play experience, animals don't seem to, quotes, understand those signals and then get themselves injured.
Into trouble. Yeah. And
so that's a different type of play, a different type of function. And exercise play, like when you're out there playing, you're getting that social experience, but an immediate thing is that you're helping your body, right? The physical fitness, the cardiovascular systems and muscular, motor control, all those things are functions that play might be providing as well. So there's many different functions of play, and different species and different contexts and different types of play may do different things that are beneficial.
And I remember you bringing up in one of your lectures, I think there was a study on spiders, and essentially the results of the study proved that play had a positive correlation with reproductive and survival fitness.
Right. This is one of the first examples that really showed functional reproductive advantages in animals. These young spiders, the males will start associating with young females before they're sexually mature. Like a lot of insect spiders go through instars, different stages before they're sexually mature. But when they're young, before they're sexually mature, a male and a female will engage in, quote, pseudo-courtship or courtship games. And if the spiders have those experiences, and one thing in spiders, unlike lots of animals, is the male is at big risk of being injured, if not killed and eaten, by his mate. And so that's not in the male's interest. And by playing with a female before they actually engage in serious sexual behavior in courtship, the males are more likely to survive if they've had that experience. And females, if they've had that playful experience, have bigger egg clutches. And so this was showing how this precocial play or pre-courtship play, or precocial courtship play, actually enhances both the survival of, in the case of the males, and the reproductive fitness of the females. But that's hard to document in many other animals. These spiders are small, and you could keep lots of them on a tabletop like this. You would not be able to replicate that, say, with monkeys or so on.
But I will say you can. I don't know if there's any experiments to prove this. There's got to be some sort of literature on it, but it's definitely true that play in humans has a positive correlation with reproductive fitness. Considering, typically the greatest player or the greatest at the event typically wins all the spoils. I was watching Gladiator last night, and so Russell Crowe's character is the ultimate gladiator. He's winning all these battles, and as he's being paraded through the streets, he's being surrounded by all these women, and it goes to high school sports. You have the one that's able to play the best athlete in the school, gets all the girls, even with gamers. There are people that play professional video games for a living, and these guys have great big followings of hordes of women who are chasing after these guys. And so I guess it's maybe not play, that's maybe more of a competition.
It's an interaction, I think, together. So, people who are sports stars do attract a female attention, but musicians also. And, when I was young, Frank Sinatra was the big deal, and you had the baby soccer, Bobby soccer, they call them. And then with the rock stars and so on, we know that if you're a good performer, you attract attention both ways, both by females, the Beyoncés and so on, are going to attract a lot of male attention, just the other way around. So, yes, in a way, if you're a good player and being an entertainer or a sports figure, those are like games in a way.
Do you think that's maybe where the term player comes from?
Well,
I guess that's where that comes from. The player gets all the girls. But yeah, so that got pretty funny there. But so maybe we can move into disadvantages. What do you say are the greatest disadvantages of play, or when it can go wrong?
Okay, well, play does have its costs, and of course, in in schools and so on, and the Puritans' idea that play just took you from doing your important things, right? So you don't play with, you got to study. So there were recent moves a few decades ago to get rid of recess. We were so concerned about our children not learning how to read and do their numbers and so on, so we just had to have them do more and more of that, more seat work. And hey, let's get rid of these things, excesses like recess, allowing kids to get out and play, because that really wasn't essential. Well, there's been a reversal now of thought about that, but a lot of schools got rid of playgrounds and got rid of the opportunities for kids to let off steam, quotes they would call it, right? And we do know that the studies now have shown that, particularly for boys, if they get the chance to run around and play outside, but they come back, they're much better at the seat work than if they haven't had a chance to have that have that break.
Yeah, I'll touch on something.
So that's one of the issues. Other is that play can become addictive, and gambling, for instance, would be an extreme, which is a bad thing. People gamble. You hear about, even in the old days, people gambling away their resources, their house, their car, and leaving families destitute because, person got too much involved in casinos and things like this. And there's a concern that all the lotteries systems that states are engaging in, presumably to help schools and so on, turns out that they're actually not that beneficial economically for the taxes, but they may specifically target people who are least able to support that. But on the other hand, the idea that maybe I could get a big resource or a payoff by winning a lottery is attractive more than people who already are doing okay. So gambling would be a thing, but other things can become addictive, including even sports. So I've known people back in the day who got into running, and if all of a sudden they would run miles every day, if they couldn't do it for some reason, they went through almost withdrawal, almost like
I've been there.
Right. And so in a way, people talked about addictions, behavioral addictions, that are often pleasurable activities taken to an extreme. And people talk about shopping, and gambling's excessive sports, but there are other kinds of situations. Plus, now there's also the risk of, I mentioned briefly in terms of kids outside playing, physical injury, right? So risk taking is so it can lead to some physical injuries,
Yeah,
everybody's familiar with knowing that you get injured by playing sports. The solution, though, isn't just to sit and not do anything, but life involves risks, and those risks, taking those risks, have perhaps some benefits, but there are those costs.
Yeah. So I'm going to touch on a couple things you said there. You were talking about how boys specifically tend to perform better at desk work when they've had enough time to go and play. And so I actually took a child and family studies course that was supposed to be a study abroad course in Sweden, but because of the pandemic, they canceled it, but they still held the class virtually. And so we got to learn about, elementary school in Sweden. And so it's spread here, and we have these things called forest schools, but the idea started in Sweden. They were called Waldorf schools. And so in these schools, they would essentially just let the kids play outside all day. They'd have a big fence, and you'd have a forest, and you just let the kids go do whatever they want. You'd keep an adult in the back to kind of keep an eye on everybody. But it turns out, though, that when these kids went on to middle school, they actually performed better than the kids who just went to normal school. And they have good schools there, too.
Yeah.
and so I found that very interesting. And then, with injury and risk taking, I was always a very playful individual growing up. My parents essentially signed me up for every sport. I got to decide what I wanted to play. I tried a few different instruments. I mean, I had every opportunity to play growing up, but I also don't really know anybody who's had as many injuries as me. I've broken both my ankles. I've broken my wrist. I've broken my nose multiple times. I mean, I've done absolutely everything you can do to break yourself. I mean, I've had multiple concussions. I've pinched nerves in my neck. I mean, the list goes on and on.
That sounds a little extreme.
Yeah, well, over the course of years, it's not that bad. But I mean, yesterday I hurt my ankle. I rolled my ankle playing basketball, and I'll be right back again playing on Friday. But yeah, but it's almost, the risk-reward ratio. It's, in my opinion, I get so much more fulfillment out of the activity of play that, as soon as I'm able to go again, I get right back out there because I see the benefits of play. I think they just, at the end of the day, outweigh the risk. So,
well, I think evolutionarily, that in the long term, that's got to also work. Otherwise, why would play have evolved? Why is it so common in so many species? And it's something that we know is young animals are very motivated to do it. It's something that's almost built in to want to engage in these vigorous behaviors, exploratory behaviors, in really intense, sustained ways. And so I think it's part of our evolutionary heritage, and that's the same on the evolutionary scale as on the individual a scale, that you find the benefits to outweigh
the risks.
The risks. And I just hope, of course, you don't have an injury that stops you from playing.
Well, it happens. When you break an ankle, you can't play for. It only takes about 6 weeks, whether you believe it or not. You can come back from a broken ankle in about 6 weeks. But I've found that at least while I'm young, I can heal quickly. I can get back from these things, and so it comes down to risk-reward ratio, and that has been kind of the buzzword so far in my podcast. It's come up in almost every episode. With Kirk, he found that his life as a whitewater kayaker, he found the reward of that was greater than the risk of injury or death. I filmed a podcast with my third cousin Jerry, who studies freshwater mussels, and we still both came to the conclusion that we like to have our lights on. TVA may negatively impact the quality of our rivers, but the reward is just outweighs the risk. I was talking today with another guest of mine, Brian Worley, and he worked on nuclear engineering for his career, and there are obviously catastrophic risks to nuclear power, but the rewards are also pretty substantial. I mean, you can cheaply power entire countries, the entire world, if you really wanted to. And so, yeah, I don't know where I'm going with that, but I find the risk-reward ratio is so important in life. I know he's a conservative thinker, but I think Thomas Sowell said, there are no solutions to problems in life, there are only compromises. And so you've got to constantly go through life thinking of, well, if I choose this decision, there will,
it's a cost-benefit analysis.
Cost-benefit analysis, that's another word for it.
And, life is full of those. Every decision you make is actually related to that, what's the cost-benefit ratio of drinking a beer versus versus not, or driving a car versus not? I mean, there are risks to do everything. Some more risks than others, and so we balance what those may be. I know people who love motorcycles and so on. I probably would not. On the other hand, I love kayaking, and I don't do whitewater kayaking anymore. or not on any scale, but that was something I could handle more than perhaps doing a motorcycle. But I like the bicycle. I like the bike, and even mountain biking. And I did break my shoulder. One of my injuries I had was with my kids biking, and I came around. And there was a muddy area, and I had on a curve, and the wheel just slipped out. And next thing I knew, it wasn't until went about another half mile before I realized that things were not right.
I mountain bike and I haven't been in a while, but I definitely am constantly running the cost-benefit analysis through my head, because I go up to Baker's Creek sometimes, and it's pretty extreme, and my greatest concern on the way down is, like, I'm having enough fun as it is. I just want to be safe. So there's these guys doing these crazy jumps that are taking all these crazy risks, and I'm just like, please let me get down in one piece, because I do not want to break my shoulder. I don't want to do... I've been lucky that I've never hurt my shoulders or my hips, and those are the joints that I'm most afraid of, and I guess your back too. I can deal with anything else. So, but yeah, cost-benefit analysis is, it's the underpinning of success. The men and the women who make the best decisions in the face of the risk reward are going to be the ones who outcompete the others, and they're going to be the rich ones, and the ones that make bad decisions are going to be the poor ones. And so it's very interesting. But we'll go ahead and begin to wrap it up. But so I'll go ahead and give you the opportunity to talk about your work, or what you're working on now, or where people can read your work, or whatever.
Well, you can give them my email address, and I'll respond to things. You can find out some of my work on the internet, but right now I've been trying to deal with retirement in a way of closing out offices and going through papers and things, and you've actually been helping me with that very generously. But I am working on a number of writing projects on both reptile research and play. I'm editing some issues on play behavior. We just have a paper coming out on play in wolf cubs, and another one on dog puppies. We're finding that, for instance, that different puppies of different breeds play differently in different with objects and so on. And so these are some of the first studies looking at the development of play in different breeds of dogs and showing how that differs. But we also know, for instance, that different types of rats also play somewhat differently. There's a lot of similarities, but there are differences which may have to do with what they were selected while those breeds were developed in the first place. And the wolf story, since we think that all the dogs came from wolves eventually, that's a good baseline then. And so I've been working on that. I've been working on some more theoretical work on play and evolution. And I'm interested in the history of animal behavior studies, and I've been working on that. I have a chapter that's just come out on the history of animal behavior studies, comparative psychology and ethology. So I'm still being able. To me, this is play also. See, my work is play, even though I'm retired. I'm not getting paid for any of this, but it's so ingrained now as something that is pleasurable and rewarding that my wife says, "Hey, you're retired now, so you're not going to the office. You're going to your hobby." She says, "This is your hobby now." It's you can't say it's work.
So you've been very soft-spoken, and I'll end on this, and we can continue the conversation after. But you've been very soft-spoken about your accomplishments, and so I remember months ago when I was beginning to kind of form notes and develop ideas for the conversation, I did a quick Google of Gordon Burghardt, and right on the first line shows your H index, which I didn't know what the H index was at that time, but it's essentially it's a composition of it's a score compiled of all the work you've done in an academic setting as far as citations and publications, and so your score was a 69. And so I also did some more research on this, and I found out that the average Nobel Prize winner was around an H score of 30. So you may not have all of the incredible accolades of some of these people that are being recognized with Nobel Prizes, but I will say your contribution to your field, at least from a numbers perspective, has been about twice the amount of the average Nobel Prize winner.
Well, I feel I've been pretty successful in being able to do what I've been doing and getting the rewards in a way of both pleasurable, but also keeping a job and being able to be able to teach and study this way. I'll study these things for all these years. And the work that I'm in, animal behavior and reptile behavior and play, it's a relatively small area compared to, the large areas of physics or chemistry or molecular biology that have a lot of implications in many areas. But it's been sort of something that I felt this was my calling in a way, to study these animals and follow the various serendipitous ways in which, like with the bear cubs, I didn't plan to have bear cubs, but what I did, and then I was able to, that play stuck with me, how playful they were, and then later on that came something that I could work with and expand, that I would never have gotten to that area if it hadn't been for this opportunity to, hey, we need somebody to raise these bear cubs for us. So I think that's one message in life, is that when you see opportunities, go with them, and even though you may not think that you're ready for it or you have the background knowledge, you can obtain that. You can go with the flow, as it were, and see if this is something that really resonates with you, really is something that works for you. Not everything works the same for everybody. That's one thing we know about evolution and individual differences, that everybody's sort of different. And so what you got to be able to experiment to see what really resonates with your own personality and abilities and interests. And you don't want to end up in a career or doing something, and I've talked to people, they made the wrong decisions, or they allowed parents or people to sort of push them into doing something that was safe or conventional, rather than follow what they really wanted to do, and then later in life they regretted it.
Yeah, very true. So you will go ahead and wrap it up here, but thank you so much. This has been a great conversation.
Fun.
So
yep.